Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 8th of June, this Monday. Of course, we're always available online to help you find the weather information you need for your village and community. You can easily do that by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov if that's how you have your bookmark. The weather info line at 800-472-0391 is open there for you. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube during the day. Of course, in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing, kind of a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about here tonight on Alaska Weather. The hazardous weather outlook tonight shows that red flag warnings are in effect from the Deltana and Tanana Flats region all the way through the Copper River Basin. The two northern warnings are red flag warnings that'll last a little bit more into Tuesday afternoon, while the Copper River Basin is looking at red flag warnings at least through tonight. All of these are due to strong and gusty winds, and if you're anywhere along the south coast, around the Anchorage Bowl, the Matanuska and Susitna Bowl, you're probably experiencing the winds coming up. Well, this is not going to help fire danger conditions in the Copper River Basin northward, at least through the next 24 to 48 hours. So conditions are being watched carefully there, and any fires, again, should be reported quickly as they could spread. But as we look at the wider area, across the upper Yukon all the way into the middle and even lower Yukon in some cases, the fire danger still remains high. Now you'll notice this area has changed a little bit over the last week or so. There's still some areas that are experiencing extreme fire danger, mainly around the Fairbanks region and southward, and also around parts of the Copper River Basin. So again, the fire conditions are being watched very carefully, and a number of starts happened up over the weekend and continue from previous weeks. So fire danger is still a big issue as we go ahead through the summer months. Looking at across the west, we're still looking at a trough of low pressure in the upper atmosphere, and you'll see that in the jet stream map here in just a little bit. That is moving eastward slowly. That's allowing colder northwesterly winds to build in across the Bering Sea. You can see the storm track across the south that's working some of the more tropical moisture well south of Alaska. You can see some of that working its way north and east here. As you look at the visible satellite picture, you can also see that the sunshine, that when the clouds part, we're getting a lot more of that convection firing up. That is those tall building cumulus clouds, and you'll see a lot of that changing shape right here across the interior, and that's where we've had a lot of the lightning strikes over the last 12 hours or so. A lot of activity here across the central and northern part of Yukon and the northern and even eastern interior, certainly even the west as well, across the middle Yukon Valley out toward the Kobuk and Noatak region. Southern areas are looking at an area of low pressure working eastward across the eastern Gulf where things were fairly dry there, but in the last 24 hours, a few spots picked up a decent amount of rain. Places like Juneau, Ketchikan saw anywhere from 1/3 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch around Petersburg. And Annette also got a decent soaking all within the last 24 hours, but most of the day appeared to be fairly dry across the region, and VFR conditions prevailed there. You can see some of the lower clouds across the southern Bering Sea, certainly across the central and western chain as well, and across the west coast. Clouds still coming in from the north and northwest. Watch the loop one more time. And if you're out across the Norton Sound region, the winds are starting to change shape a little bit. We've got two areas of colder air trying to work their way in from west to east, so that's allowing a little bit more of a very brief southerly flow here, and then the colder and drier air should probably push back in. So here's a look at the surface charts. Here's our scattered area of thunderstorms all the way from Yukon into the central interior and even points westward, and our two areas of slightly cooler weather trying to work their way eastward. More of a major player is the low pressure system just north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. That's around 986 millibars. A southwesterly fetch on the south side of it and more of a northerly fetch on the western side of that. That's bringing in more stable air from the central and western Bering Sea. High pressure still large and in charge across the eastern Gulf. That's at 1,030 millibars, and you'll see that stronger southerly flow working against a pressure gradient across south central and southwestern Alaska. The winds coming up across Prince William Sound, Portage, Cook Inlet region, as well as areas around Kodiak, and those winds will probably continue as we head through tonight and tomorrow. Up north, warm enough for rain around Barrow this afternoon. Areas of clouds across the Arctic coast, as you would expect, and around the Chukchi Sea. A little bit of a breakup in the cloud cover there, north and west of Wainwright and southward through the Bering Strait and west of Tin City through Gamble. You see a few more clouds in that general area. As we head through tonight, low pressure will continue to just creep eastward across the southern Bering, just to about the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula around Cold Bay and False Pass. Low pressure should drop to about 990 millibars. There'll be widespread areas of rain around Bristol Bay and south and west of Castle Cape. Coming into the south and western side of Kodiak Island, you'll probably pick up a little more rain than everybody else. As you get into the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula, a pretty decent southerly fetch coming in. That means a decent chance for a couple inches of rain for you. Around Prince William Sound, it's going to be a breezy and choppy day. Showers are a little more likely as you head into the Susitna Valley, and all day long today we've seen a fairly steady stream of rain working its way up on the western side of the valley. Across Norton Sound, up toward the Noatak and Kobuk valleys and the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, watch for some rain showers there in the west. A little more spotty as you head eastward toward Arctic Village and southward toward Fort Yukon. And you'll have plenty of clouds, but the amount of wet weather that you should experience will probably be considerably less. Clouds are building into the central and northern parts of southeast, while the southern areas tonight will still remain fairly clear. And as we get into Tuesday, you'll notice the next weather system dropping out of eastern Asia will head toward the western Bering Sea. And that should approach 997 millibars. On the north side of that, it's cold enough for snow, mainly over the water there. As you approach the Chukchi Seacoast, you're likely looking at more rain than anything else. There might be some brief mixing there west of St. Lawrence Island. And south of that, we're still watching what was one system is now broken off into two pieces, and that'll sit across the YK Delta and Bristol Bay with low pressure readings around 990 millibars or just a little bit higher. Where we see breaks in the clouds, there's a decent chance for some showers and storms to pop up. A lot of that's going to happen around the Alcan border and maybe just west out toward Fort Yukon. And you'll notice some of that probably up across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range too. A little bit further south, it'll be steady rain. Some of that could be heavy at times around Prince William Sound and northern parts of southeast, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and everything west starts to get a little more showery and drizzly in nature. So we get into Wednesday, the colder air is trying to work in across the Yukon Valley and into the western interior. Low pressure in the north, the circulation is 994 millibars. In the south, it's considerably higher at 1,006. We'll notice that circulation is still creeping eastward and probably combining eventually with what we see in the western Gulf. That too is around 1,006 millibars, so it's all relative in scale to what's nearby. Across southeast, rainfall should be fairly light across southeast. It won't be as strong as what we experienced in the north and the northern Gulf as we head into at least Tuesday, but there will be some wetter weather, probably more of a moderate rain for you than anything else. And out across the central and western Bering, we're still looking at widespread areas of fog as moisture pours over the Bering Sea coast as we get into midweek, and probably Thursday, very little change there. Most of the disturbed weather will be out across the west, and a north and westerly flow coming into the Chukchi Sea coast could actually bring a little bit of snow and maybe rain mix there as you get out toward Barrow. So still some lingering warmth even despite that cold air dropping southward. Here's a look at southeast today. Temperatures poked into the upper 50s and lower 60s for some places. Again, a fairly mild day for many as the sun came out, especially across the southern half. The capital city saw temperatures back in the mid-50s today around Prince William Sound, upper 40s and lower 50s, 55 in Homer, 51 in Kenai, 57 for Anchorage, 51 around Talkeetna today in Gulkana, and Glen Allen saw temperatures also in the mid-50s, about the same there for Northway and Eagle. Fairbanks saw 61 by late afternoon. Healy was around 52. Fort Yukon 63 degrees. Northward, you'll see most areas around Arctic Village, and north of that up toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, all in the 50s. But when you move west of that, from Atkasuk westward toward the coast, temperatures drop almost 20 degrees or so. Not a mistake. Barrow was at 40, and then here's that colder flow coming down the coast. Temperatures there around Wainwright all the way down toward Point Hope and Point Lay into Kotzebue Sound are only in the 30s today. Kivalina saw 39, 42 in Kotzebue, 39 in Nome with 47 at Unalakleet. McGrath and interior locations like Tanana, Ambler, and Bettles were all in the 50s today. Galena showed 55. 51 in Bethel, 46 for Nunivak Island. St. Lawrence Island only 37. Mid to upper 40s around the Pribilofs, with Bristol Bay temperatures jumping back into the 50s there. 40s and 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, 52 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and the central and western chain all hovering in the lower to mid 40s this afternoon. Overnight lows along the southwest coast will be in the mid-40s there. Into the interior, a little bit cooler, lower 40s for most areas around the middle Tanana Valley. Upper 30s to about 40 degrees for the southern coast of the Seward Peninsula. Close to freezing for the Arctic coast, south central in the mid-40s for many. A little bit cooler around Cordova and perhaps Valdez, closer to 40 degrees for you. Some places in the 30s. 40s for southeast, Kodiak Island just shy of 50, and mid-40s for the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit cooler as well toward the central and western chain. High temps there tomorrow back in the mid-40s. The southwest coast and Bristol Bay in the lower to mid-50s. Places like Bethel will creep up on 60 degrees. Unalakleet about 53, 49 in Nome, 42 for Barrow. The interior, including Fairbanks and points east, in the upper 60s and lower 70s. And again, that could be warm enough for another widely scattered round of thunderstorms. South Central back in the mid-50s, including Anchorage and Prince William Sound, a little bit cooler than that, about 50 degrees. Mid-50s for Kodiak and mid to upper 50s for most of southeast. Places like Ketchikan and Annette might work their way into the lower 60s tomorrow with a little more sun. Flying weather includes the risk of thunderstorms across the eastern interior. The Arctic coast will flirt with IFR right along the coastline. Just south of that, MVFR, and even further south, VFR conditions, but watch for MVFR across some of the northern passes and across the western areas of the Bering Strait. IFR conditions around St. Matthew and the Pribilofs and offshore just south of Nunivak Island, and also across the south-facing coastlines of the Alaska Peninsula, including places like Sand Point. Around Valdez and Cordova, you may see IFR conditions throughout the day with rain in the vicinity, as well as Haines and Skagway. Here's a look at your pass conditions, and as we see them at this point for tomorrow, Anaktuvik Pass heading for MVFR conditions as you saw on the chart. Same goes for Adigan Pass. Watch for showers and storms in those regions, but it'll mainly be rain around Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. IFR conditions expected to develop there. We'll keep it at MVFR for Rainy Pass as well as Windy Pass throughout your Tuesday. Isabel Pass expected to be marginal through most of the Tuesday period. Mentasta Pass at this point, we're going to say showers in the region, but probably VFR. Tanita Pass looks to be showery and VFR through most of your Tuesday. Portage Pass, especially the eastern side, is going to be IFR through a good chunk of the day. Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see IFR in the morning, maybe some of that improvement during the daytime with a lifting of the ceiling. Freezing levels show cold air sitting very close to Prince William Sound and South Central right now. That cold air aloft dropping levels as low as 2,000 feet and below, 4,000 to 6,000 feet a little bit further south into southeast and into the central and northern interior. As you get out across the west, you can see the levels also dropping to about 2,000 to 4,000 feet for the Chukchi Seacoast and points around Barrow. There's another surge of colder air here across the central Bering, and then considerably warmer weather heading westward, anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 feet. The surface freezing line near the Arctic coast and dropping south of St. Lawrence Island temporarily. The icing potential keeps levels below 6,000 feet across the northern Gulf. You'll see that light to isolated moderate potential there, as well as areas across the central and western Aleutians below 3,000 feet. After that, we'll watch for some improvement there as the moisture starts to thin out. The entire pattern seems to be changing somewhat. Here's our trough of low pressure. And this has been situated out in the west for about the last couple weeks, and then it moved eastward. Well, that brought a lot of wind and water into the Gulf of Alaska, as well as parts of southeast after a very warm and dry stretch there. Well, this pattern continues to shift ever so slightly eastward, so things are progressing anyway. Whether they're actually changing for a longer duration of time again, we'll have to see. But right now it does look like this seems to be somewhat of a progressive pattern for the moment. At 9,000 feet, you see another trough digging into the northwestern part of the state. You can see winds coming in around 30 knots or so into the Chukchi Seacoast. More of a westerly flow reaching the Seward Peninsula as we head into tomorrow. Otherwise, a broad north and westerly flow that's fairly light across the central and western Bering. 25 to 35 knots there. Circulation just outside of Bristol Bay, holding winds across the interior and west of the Alaska Range around 20 knots. Much stronger flow out across the western Gulf, 45 to 65 knots, and high pressures guiding in winds from the south and west to southeastern Alaska, 20 to 40 knots there. Some of the stronger winds, though, ran out over the heart of the Gulf. At 3,000 feet, our circulation is still sitting around Bristol Bay. You can see high pressure a little bit further south of the Queen Charlottes and Haida Gwaii. Southerly winds working northward towards southeast is starting to slow down as they make the turn around the high pressure ridge, 20 to 40 knots there in the eastern Gulf and 25 to 40 knots in the west, coming over Kodiak, mainly from the south. Across the interior, wind speeds are only around 10 to 15 knots. Same goes for the Arctic coast, 15 to 30 there, and more of a west and northwest flow coming across the Aleutians and the peninsula. overall wind speeds not terribly strong at this level. And turbulence potential will call above 6,000 feet for the northwest and the Brooks Range. Most of that's going to be light to isolated moderate as two weather disturbances are working in. Probably have a little bit of a turbulence working across south central. Some of that could be isolated moderate though. You're going to watch for areas around Portage and Prince William Sound and around Cook Inlet region and Kodiak Island. A lot of that is really going to be above 10,000 feet for some of the worst of it, but probably low level wind shear as you get into the morning hours there, as the winds are picking up right now and probably lasting through the morning there. So watch for that. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a look at the sea ice edge and of course your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor. On behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, and Alaska Public Media, thank you for tuning in to tonight's episode of Hangar Flying. This evening, we welcome back Dr. Dave Schwartz to the program. Dr. Schwartz is a senior engineer at the Anchorage Aircraft Certification Office with the Federal Aviation Administration. He's also a pilot, and he was on the team that did a study on fatal and serious injury accidents in Alaska in 2010. On our last show, we talked a little bit about the pancake breakfast that's sponsored by the FAA and your presentation. Your talk about the use of helmets and other safety equipment is very important. And talk about helmets a little bit. Military pilots routinely wear helmets. Why should civilian pilots wear helmets?
Well, honestly, it's a lot of the same reasons that the military pilots do them as well. The military is more used to risk management concepts sometimes than the civilian world is. In Alaska especially, we do some fairly high-risk flying. We fly into runways that are not previously surveyed. We take some risks because that's what flying in Alaska is. I mean, that's part of what flying is, why flying in Alaska is such a neat thing to do. But it does carry along with it some risks that they can be minimized, but they can't be avoided entirely. And so we see a certain number of accidents in the state of Alaska that if we take good care to survive the accident afterward, we'll be able to convert some of these accidents that do kill people into ones that are maybe damaging to airplanes, but not to the people.
So you think that not just pilots, but passengers should also wear helmets?
Yeah, especially when you're in the high-risk operations. When you're talking about an aviation accident, most of our data comes from pilots. Now, we had an incident recently that a pilot in a fairly traditional Cub flip-over kind of accident. As you can see in the picture, the helmet was very similar to the one that I'm holding here. The pilot was doing a normal off-field airport landing, one that he had done many times before. He landed a little bit long, overshot the runway, got on the brakes a little bit too hard and flipped over. It's the kind of accident we see a lot of in Super Cubs, and usually it's non-fatal. But this time, the superstructure of the airplane started to collapse on him, and he hit his head really hard, and the blow punctured the helmet. We know from the amount of energy that's required to puncture this style of helmet that if that kind of energy had been put into his head, he most likely would not have survived.
That's great evidence right there. If a pilot is interested in trying a helmet, is there someplace in Alaska where they can go and do this?
There are. There's a good shop in Fairbanks, and there's also one in Anchorage that both carry helmets. And one of the things about helmets is that because of the padding and the sizing and your headset, if you're going to use one, there are quite a few things about the helmet that make it need to be customized to you. We don't all have the same heads. And inside your airplane, some airplanes, I'm fairly tall in seated height, so I need a fairly low profile helmet so I'm not hitting my head on the superstructure. Some people are shorter so they can take a larger helmet. Some manufacturers design helmets that are shaped the way that their test dummy was, and other test dummies are a little different. So they're very customized to the person, and the ability to try one on really means that you're going to end up with something that's more comfortable, and if it's more comfortable, you're much more likely to wear it.
And what are we looking at for a price range quickly?
They run from around $300 to $350 on up to a couple thousand. Usually when you get up to a couple thousand, you'll be talking about buying not only just a helmet, but you're also talking about visors and an integrated headset with an active noise canceling system embedded in the headset. That's part of what drives up the price. They usually also have a fiberglass reinforcement or carbon fiber shell as well.
Okay, that's some great information, and I hope that pilots that are halfway considering or interested in trying a helmet will go and check it out. Thank you.
Thank you.
We really appreciate your time, Dave, and your dedication to aviation safety. We appreciate that the Federal Aviation Administration is interested and willing to let their staff come out and talk about such safety features. Ladies and gentlemen, we encourage you to consider purchasing helmets for yourself or for pilots or passengers that fly frequently. Helmets are an important piece of safety equipment that can provide significant protection for the one irreplaceable item in an aircraft, and that's your brain. Thanks for watching Hangar Flying. Until next time, fly safely.
Now time for a look at your sea ice edge across the Chukchi Sea. A lot of water opening up there all the way north and west of Point Lay to about Point Hope, and then north of Shishmer up there. We still have a pretty solid pack generally north and east of Barrow there, but a lot of changes continue as the weather is picking up a little bit there across the Chukchi Sea. In the next couple days, probably see some openings up in that direction, so we'll be watching very carefully, and you can too anytime. Weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php, and look for the latest map there. In the interactive link will take you to a map similar to this. Lots of kind of a patchwork color there, and you can click on each individual shape and region and find out how thick the ice is close to your community and village. Here's a look at the weather now in southeast Alaska. South and westerly winds coming in south of Sitka to the Clarence Strait region, about 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Northwesterlies across the Clarence Strait itself coming in at 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. Sea is a little bit smaller up around Cross Sound and Stevens Passage, and then a southerly flow for the Lynn Canal at 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. And southeasterly winds as you head up the outer coast from 25 knots to about 30 knots heading into Icy Bay and Cape Fairweather. That becomes southerly with time on Wednesday. A southwesterly flow coming in a little bit further south down the coast, 20 knots with an 8-foot sea. And southeasterlies across the inner waterways, more of a southerly flow up across the Lynn Canal, but seas generally 3 to 4 feet on the inside. For South Central, a much stronger wind day for Prince William Sound and outside of Prince William Sound in the northern Gulf, 40 knots there. Otherwise, 12 to 13-foot seas across the north and western Gulf. Southeasterlies coming into Resurrection Bay in the eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula. Northeasterlies coming down Cook Inlet, 25 to as high as 35 knots west of the Barrens. A considerably lesser wind across Shelikof Strait at 15 knots with a 5-foot sea and 25 knots on the east side of Kodiak Island. Those winds from the south with a 12-foot sea. On Wednesday, conditions improve tremendously across the north and western Gulf, 10 to 15 knots in all areas, 25 knots east of Kodiak Island, a light and variable wind inside of Shelikof Strait, and northeasterly winds coming down Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots with a 3 to 4-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula, southeasterly winds inside of Bristol Bay and southerlies and southwesterlies across the Pacific coast for the peninsula there, 30 knots with 15 to as high as 18-foot seas around Sand Point and west. Westerlies north of Cold Bay with a 4-foot sea. Those become 25 knots with a 7-foot sea on Wednesday. Still looking at westerlies inside of Bristol Bay and on the Pacific coast, 25 knots with winds or seas as high as 12 feet there south of Sand Point and King Cove. For the Aleutians, a broad westerly flow with a few minor interruptions there. West of Nikolsky, you're looking at more of a northwesterly wind, but generally 25 to 30 knots all areas, with 11 to 13 foot seas on the Pacific side and 8 to 10 foot seas on the Bering Sea side. As you get out toward Kiska and Attu, those seas diminish a little bit out toward 9 feet and drop even more as we head into Wednesday down to 7 feet. But all areas still looking at about a 15 to 20 knot wind. A few areas a little bit stronger there south of Unalaska and Nikolsky at about 30 knots. On the Pacific side, 6 to 8 foot seas are expected and 7 to 10 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast as you head through Wednesday afternoon. Easterly flow coming offshore between Hooper and Macoriac, a 20 knot wind there with a 4 foot sea. Southerlies light across St. Lawrence Island, southwesterlies for the St. Matthew region, and looking at northerlies south of Kuskokwim out toward the Pribilofs, 15 to 25 knots with seas there at 7 feet, becoming westerly with time. Again, as north and westerly winds start to run down the coast behind low pressure working inland. You're looking at westerlies coming ashore around Kuskokwim Bay and the Pribilofs at 20 to 25 knots. And again, that northerly flow strengthening up about 20 knots or so with 4 to 5 foot seas around St. Lawrence, St. Matthew, and north of Nunivak Island. And across the Arctic coast, variable winds around 10 to as strong as 15 knots over the ice. A south and southwesterly wind coming up the Chukchi Seacoast at 20 to 25 knots. We need to watch for freezing spray out here across the open waters temperatures, and the water temperatures themselves still cold enough to support that freezing spray danger. So watch for some of that. That could be heavy at times. As you get into Wednesday, a southerly flow over the ice at 20 knots over the Beaufort and 10 to 20 knots across the Chukchi Seacoast all the way up toward Barrow. The strongest winds north of Barrow around 20 knots and as low as 10 knots west of Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. That's a look at your marine forecast. Let's recap the weather across all of Alaska now. We've had some drier weather across southern parts of southeast, but that is quickly coming to an end as high pressure is dropping south and east. A wet weather storm is working its way eastward, spreading more clouds eastward tonight. But for most areas across the Gulf of Alaska and points west, a heavier stream of moisture working into Prince William Sound, the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and Bristol Bay. Widespread areas of light to occasionally moderate rain working their way up the YK Delta through Norton Sound and into the Brooks Range, with showers out ahead of that and evening thunderstorms that are continuing at this hour. Storms will be back, especially where we find some sunnier breaks tomorrow. Heavier rain starting to work its way eastward across the Gulf Coast, low pressure across Bristol Bay, and cold enough for a rain and snow mix across the northern parts of the Bering Strait toward the Chukchi Seacoast. And for Wednesday, a little bit more light rain. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX Brief for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.